You can come off of mute and talk, or stay on mute. I see you're on the phone, I think, so that's fine. We're just chatting about some different things.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I was talking about the GovCon chamber. We're really going to work on visibility, but the second thing is I want to double the amount of money going to small businesses. So right now it's roughly 100 billion, 120 billion, but I want to get that up to 40% of the federal contract dollars. So this big, massive step forward. And it's really interesting how closely that ties together with visibility. If you can get people to do the very basic steps and follow the process, I describe it a different way as doing the right thing the right way and then doing enough of the right thing. Then those companies will develop the success or achieve the success on their own. So all I do is get the ball. Really, that's it. I just want to be a pebble on the top of a mountain that causes an avalanche of success. So I gotta.
Yeah, that's a great goal. I like the way you say that.
Yeah, fortunately we're recording. So, hey Tim, thanks for joining. We're just chatting here. You can come off and chat or not.
How are you?
Excellent.
It's something interesting. I don't know if it's appropriate to say or not, but I met a guy who told me how much it cost him at a HUBZone event in Chicago to get 8A certified. You would not believe what he told me.
Oh.
Well, what did he tell you, first off? And second, I would believe it's
including now he's a construction guy in Chicago.
Yeah.
Including, he said, cleaning up papers for lawyers. Now it tells me he's got bad accounting. So including that cost, he said it cost $100,000.
Yeah, no, tell him to come to me and I'll do it for 50 and I'll farm it out to somebody for 25 and take 25K as a profit. If you're talking about cleaning up paper, first off, 100,000 still sounds like too much, but the typical 8A price tag, and I don't want to pretend like I'm an 8A expert, but I've been through the process enough that I've got an opinion. If $5,000 is a fair thing, if you've got your ducks in a row and you send it out, somebody's putting that paper together and really helping make sure you got your justification down, that's a fair thing. That's the only one that I actually believe people should pay for, because the time involved to get it is a lot, and you might as well use a pro. But $100,000, that's $95,000 for them to clean up the business. That's a pretty steep price tag. So
I thought it was too.
Has he done it already, or is he was just saying that's what he heard?
No, he did it, and since then he's been HUBZone certified. So
yeah. Well, so is he making millions of dollars in success now?
He's got one deal in the HUBZone deal, construction.
Well, yeah, he's 8A though. He should be racking that up for 9 years or 7 years. So, hey everybody, thanks for joining. Those of you who are joining in, I'm Neil McDonnell. Wherever on the screen, you'll see Gretchen.
Hi.
Today.
Hi everybody.
Tim, yeah, there's a lot of folks out there that consult. I never actually say on the price, but really it's the results. If they're getting something for it, if their whole company's being cleaned up and they're getting contracts, then I don't think it's a bad idea. I've been in companies where I've had employees that are cost a lot of money. Everywhere you're spending money. So I was talking about just with the GovCon chamber, we're getting ready in 2020 to just tighten up our focus again and get our message out. Our next 5 year, of strategy and business plan. So one is to increase the visibility of small businesses in the GovCon space. The second one was to double the amount of money going to small businesses from the federal contract dollars. So basically get us to $200 billion or 40% of the contract dollars going to smalls. And then the third one is to have every small business program exceeding its goals. So in the women's program, I think is 5%, STBO is 3%, and HUBZone 3%, and 8A 5%. 8A hits its goals consistently, but the other three programs don't. And the overall small business program kind of barely squeaks by, right? So the 8A program is almost double its goal. Well, there's no reason every other small business program shouldn't also be able to hit double numbers according to goals. So that's kind of our big focus on GovCon Chamber as we go into 2020. Hey, thanks for joining. Whoever just joined, I'm Neil McDonnell. I think you see Gretchen on there as well. She'll be our speaker today. We'll get started a little bit as we get on top of the hour. Yeah, Gretchen, one of the things I was trying to look at with the GovCon Chamber is how to really communicate to everybody out there that, like, bringing small businesses together. We've got all these disparate organizations that support small businesses. It's like, how can we come together so that we're all one organization, even if it's like virtual, right? There's an 8A association, there's a Veterans Association, there's these, it's like coming together under one umbrella group, even if it's not a corporation group,
Right.
but just where we all work together, because so many 8As are also something else, like a veteran-owned firm or a woman-owned firm, and vice versa. You can do that anywhere across the board.
Right.
And that's a big goal of mine, is to go, how can we work closer together to really drive the goals? We kind of put together our resources, if you will.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea to kick around, because that isn't well done today.
No, there's still a huge decentralization that happens in the GovCon space. The very fact that we have events, like Tim was just talking about, an event in Chicago or Illinois. I don't know why these events are virtual. So you'll see us do a lot more of that going into 2020 as we try to hit our goals. So
try to pull people together, huh?
Yeah. So, hey, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to get started in just a second. Definitely like to respect your time and respect your time as well, Gretchen. But some people come in flipping right on the top of the hour, so I'll give a second to slide in by just doing maybe a couple little plugs for anybody who hasn't been here a while, or you're newer to this on the GovCon Chamber. For those of you who've been part of the organization a long time and coming in, we did make a change. We started as the HUBZone Chamber of Commerce, and we switched over to the GovCon Chamber of Commerce so that we can be all inclusive of every small business category, including small business without a tag. And the reason we did that is because as we got really good helping HUBZone firms, we realized that 20%, 22% of HUBZone firms are veteran, 37% of them are women-owned, and 69% are minority or 8A owned. So it made no sense for us to pretend like we were only helping HUBZones when everything we were doing for HUBZones could apply to a woman-owned firm, because it was really just about process. It wasn't about the tag. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do as we move forward. And you might have heard me say this before, and I'll just kind of offer this up to those of you who are joining the webinar today as a little bit of a thank you. I'll give you a tip that I think is the most important tip out there. In GovCon space, if you don't know this, there's roughly 306,000 active small businesses right now. 306,000 active small businesses in the mix. Of those, I graded them all on A, B, C, D, F, right? 99.9% of the small businesses get a D or an F, meaning you're virtually invisible to the federal buyer. And this is a big deal, because when you think about it, there's so many federal buyers out there, you need them to find you. I said 306,000, right? 306,000 small businesses, 8 companies, 8. Well, after this weekend, 10. But 10 companies out of 300,000 get an A. And this all starts with your dynamic small business search profile. Your SAM profile and DSBS make up your overall SBA profile, which is fed into many agency databases. So when they're looking for buyers, they'll come in here. And so my tip for you is to go check out your profile. And if you don't know what it looks like or whatever, give me a text after this, shoot me an email, something that just says, hey, Neil, can you give me a quick rating on mine? And I'll tell you what's wrong with yours. And that's a fair statement, since 99.9% are in a bad shape. But the fix is very fast. You just go in, you update it. And this is really important, because you can pop above your competitors, and the government is trying to make a renewed push on finding small businesses to work with. So I highly encourage you to get out there. This is kind of my filler tip at the beginning of this webinar, just to help you out. It's the biggest deal. And let me just put one more number for you. In the federal government, there's over 200,000 buyers, people in the acquisition workforce. DOD alone has 150,000. If you called 10 people a day, and there's 260 work days in a year, you're only going to be able to reach 2,600, so let's say 3,000 people in a year. That means there's 200,000 potential buyers you just can't reach because we can't pick up the phone that many times, right? So that means you need them to find you when they're looking for companies like yours. When you increase your visibility, then the potential of them finding you is significantly increased. So I highly encourage you to do that. Every single webinar or, podcast I've done with federal buyers, they say this exact same thing. It all starts with SAM and DSBS, and from there, you begin to differentiate yourself with other marketing material, your competencies, your experience, et cetera. So please get ready to do that. I want to welcome everybody. I'm going to put everybody on mute for the moment. When we get to Q&A, I'm going to come back and unmute. But I'm going to take that off. And then Gretchen, can you make sure that you can unmute yourself just while I'm watching? And I'm going to introduce Gretchen. Perfect. So you're good to go. So Gretchen, I'm just going to quickly introduce you and let you take the stage. And I'll monitor people coming in at the last minute. But let me introduce Gretchen, who's going to be doing our webinar today. I'm really excited about what she's talking about. And so first, Gretchen Richards is from Dynamic Business Capabilities. This is a local firm for me, so here in the DC area. The fun part for me also, though, is Gretchen and I have a lot of similarities that just popped through our career, and one of them being both from spending a time out in California. So that was fun for me to find somebody else who's familiar with my California stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I really liked about, Gretchen, not just you, but your company with Dynamic Business Capabilities was the vision statement of improved small business success rate. And so the vision is a longer vision, but it starts off with improved small business success rate, by this way. And the chamber, and this is why I really wanted to invite Gretchen to come in and talk to us, we have that same mission. We want to improve small business success rate, and we do it through a different set of activity. So these tied really well together. But when Gretchen and I were talking about her topic, her expertise, and the things that she helps small businesses with, this one drove right into what I think is important for us in the chamber to teach people, that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. Part of the process of winning contracts, the government looks at your firm and sees your retention rate, right? Prime contractors look in. And this is really important from a bait and switch type approach, if you think about it that way, that the government doesn't want, or the buyer doesn't want to see a company come in with these kind of people, but the company not being stable enough that the turnover rate gets rid of the people who helped win the contract, and now it's a bunch of unknowns coming in. And so it's a differentiator if you can increase your retention rate. And this really attracted me to Gretchen, your topic today. And so, engagement and retention is a big part of success factors in government contracting. And so that was something important that I wanted to see brought to the chamber and Gretchen to be able to share with us. So the last thing I'll just mention that I thought was really appropriate for making Gretchen a perfect speaker for us today is she comes from both the large industry and small business perspective. So she gets it from different perspectives, but also comes from leadership and business advice, as well as coming from the subject matter expertise advice being on the CIO side. So she's technical and also on the business side. And that's a really important thing for me when I find people who teach us is, have you actually done what you're doing? Have you had to live through both the successes and also the mistakes? And Gretchen has done that. And that was really exciting for me. So Gretchen, I want to turn the floor over to you, and I'm going to kind of go into the background here and let you take over the webinar. Thank you very much for being here today.
Okay, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. So I need to share my screen. Here we go. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yep, perfect.
All right. So thank you, Neil, for having me here today. I want to talk about employee engagement and how you get engagement by really creating an environment that promotes high performance. Hold on. Hold on one second. Okay. So I agree with Neil. I think that employee engagement and retention is something that is important for all companies companies, but is specifically important for government contractors. So one, it's important for all consulting firms because as a consulting firm, as you grow, you're adding consultants that you're selling to your customers. And if you are just continually backfilling consultants, it's really hard to add consultants and grow because there's only so many people that you can hire in any given time period. So today I want to go over some engagement and retention statistics, and then I want to talk about what I think the #1 misconception about engagement is that really prevents engagement improvement efforts from having the impact that people want, and talk about what's that missing piece. Because if you can get more engagement, you can have more retention. So let's look at some of the statistics. So last year, US companies spent over $3 billion on employee engagement improvement efforts, and the needle barely moved. The overall engagement rates went from 33% to 34% of the US workforce. And the reason people spent so much money on the engagement efforts is because there's a pretty clear correlation between engaged employees and revenue. So the next two statistics show that companies with highly engaged employees make somewhere between 2 and 2.5 times the amount of revenue of those with low engaged employees. And the last statistic says that there's 60% of the workforce out there doesn't know what the company is trying to do, doesn't know how they're trying to do it, or their approach for getting it done. So those are clearly employees that are not engaged and clearly employees that are not performing well. So engagement impacts not only revenue, but retention. And highly engaged employees are 87% less likely to leave their companies. And that's important because companies spent about $11 billion last year because of employee turnover. So if you want to look at like why are so many people leaving, if you ask the employers, 89% think the people leave because of money. But when you ask the people who quit, only 12% of them say that they actually left for money. So that's a 77% discrepancy, which is pretty big. And so I look to the next statistic to try to help figure out why that discrepancy is there and why it's so big. So 75% of employees who quit say they quit their boss and not just their job. So there's a lot that can be done to improve engagement and retention. So let's look at the #1 misconception about engagement, which I believe is that most people approach improving engagement by making people happy. That if we can make people happy, that they'll be engaged. And a lot of employee engagement efforts are done through the HR department. And they come up with things like, if you do research, you'll see that these 3 categories are what most people are recommending to improve engagement. Either social events like happy hours, team building, getting people together to do a charity event, which are all good in promoting people to get to know each other better, but it's really outside of their day-to-day work activities. And so it doesn't really move the needle on engagement. The other thing that they recommend to improve engagement is sort of freebies, like stocking the kitchen with food and drinks, giving people like a Starbucks card every time they do something good, giving them foosball tables or ping pong tables where they can take breaks and play things. And again, while all of those are nice and people enjoy them, they're not really making them more engaged in their day-to-day activities. The other big category of things that people recommend is to give people more information. Make sure that the company's goals are clear, explain why you made the decisions you've made, give them more frequent feedback, or give them personality tests like the DISC assessment or Colby or Myers-Briggs. And while those can be good, especially the personality tests can be quite insightful, it's not necessarily moving the needle on engagement. So I believe what the missing piece is that if you set people up to be high performers, then they're going to be engaged. And there's 2 points to that. One is that engagement really is about being engaged in your day-to-day activities. And if you're succeeding in your day-to-day activities, you're going to be happy and successful in your day-to-day activities. And high performers are always engaged, right? it feels good to be successful. So when I came up with this approach, I really wanted to take a step back and do some research and get some training into what makes people high performers. And I took some training, did research, and I saw that a lot of the high performance coaches out there and high performance books really were all saying the same thing, that there's some basic human needs or basic human drives that that are what inspire people to really be engaged. And so I took those and I figured out, how do you map them to the corporate world, and what does that look like in a business? And I came up with 5 key engagement drivers that I call VIGOR, for vision, independence, growth, outcomes, and relationships. And if you manage those drivers on top of a foundation of leadership and trust, you're going to have engaged employees. So let's go through that. So let's dive into the VIGOR part. The V is for vision, right? And the vision is your company's mission, the value that it's bringing to the customers, the purpose for the company being in existence. And you want to see what's the positive impact that you're bringing to your customer. But we call it a vision because it really is supposed to conjure up a picture in someone's head of the value that you're bringing. And a lot of vision statements try to be very general and very broad. And in that generalness, they can be very bureaucratic sounding in some of the words. And I think it loses some of the inspiration that you can get when you're more specific and clear and use words that have a little more energy to them. So here's 2 examples. These are both current examples that I pulled off the internet, both 2 big technology integrators. The first one says that their vision is to be the premier technology integrator in their market by providing a difference, by supporting their customers' mission, engaging the best talent in the industry, and providing strong shareholder returns. Now, to me, that's not inspirational at all. There's lots of words in there that are just sort of hard to come up with a picture. Making a difference, supporting your customer's mission doesn't conjure up an image in my mind. So this other one is more specific. It says realizing the full potential of the internet and having universal access for education, full participation in culture, and to drive a new era in development, etc. So to me, that actually conjures up an image in my head with the universal access of education. I actually have a picture of a little kid in a village somewhere with a computer device that's logging into the internet to pull down information to get their homework done or to figure out how to do something. And the verb to drive has a lot of energy to it. It implies leadership. It provides empowerment. It provides sort of an energy to move forward. So I think the second one is much more powerful than the first one. So vision, I do recommend people look at their vision statement, especially with millennials coming into the workforce. People really want to be part of something bigger than themselves and to have more of a purpose in the world. So the next thing is independence. And independence is really where the employee engagement stuff sort of overlaps with process, because it gets into clear roles, clear decision making, clear handoffs, clear escalation criteria. And it's a little counterintuitive, but the more structured and clearer a company is on their roles and all that handoff decision making, the more freedom it actually gives the employees. And the reason is it makes clear where their box is. It makes clear where their spaces that they can be innovative, where they do have control. If there isn't that clarity and the lines aren't clear, then people hesitate, right? And they're guessing at where the lines are, and they either guess where the line is too close to them, or they guess where the line is too far away from them. And either one causes problems. and you can use a sports team analogy. The really good, like football teams, it's really clear how they're going to hand off. It's really clear what their roles are. It's really clear that they're going to hold their positions. And then bad football teams are not doing the handoffs well. People are not holding their positions. They're bumping into each other. They're getting into each other's way, and they just kind of look like the bad news bears. So to free people up, to know this is my space, this is where I can work, you really do need that structure, and you really do need that clarity of where the roles are. And you want to do it in a way where people do have the ability to influence their work environment and their process, right? You don't want the process to be so prescriptive that people don't have flexibility to be creative and to be innovative. The next thing to look at is growth. And one of the aspects of growth is really managing change. And this one can be a little tricky because everybody is a little different in how much change they're comfortable with. Some people like a lot of change or they get bored. Other people want a lot of stability or they get stressed out. So that's one thing you want to kind of consider when you're hiring staff is how much change is in your environment, and are you hiring people that have a good tolerance for that amount of change. But you want to be strategic in managing the change, because if you don't, it can quickly devolve into chaos or chaotic environment, and it's very hard to be successful. It's very hard to be a high performer in a chaotic environment where things are changing so quickly that nobody really knows what's going on. The other part of growth is that you want people to be able to co-create solutions, right? Instead of sort of the recommendations on the previous slide where you're supposed to explain why different decisions were made, if you can give people input into the pros and cons and what do they think about different scenarios before you make the decision, that's much more engaging. It gives a much more interesting dialogue across the different people. It leads to better decision making. So you want to give people those opportunities to learn and grow. And the last thing I'm going to say about growth is you want to give people opportunities to take on new responsibilities and challenges. And this takes a little creativity, it takes a little thought, which can be hard to do when you're in your day-to-day. But if you're suffering from having too much on your plate and you have people working for you, take a look at the things that are on your plate and see if there is something that you could delegate down that might give someone an opportunity to stretch or grow or do something that's different and challenging for them. Now, of course, you want to do that in a way that supports them, that you don't give them something that's very high risk or high priority without some kind of safety net. But it also gives you a chance to work on your mentoring skills. So outcome. So outcome is important. It's important to have alignment in what you're doing with what you said you're going to do or what your vision was. This is especially important if you have salespeople that are out selling one thing, but they know the delivery team is not going to quite come up and deliver what they're selling. That can be very disengaging. You can have very high turnover under those kinds of scenarios. The other thing in outcome is people want to take pride in the quality of the work. They want to know that what they're doing adds value to the customer. And they also want to know that the company appreciates and is going to reward them for their work. So making the criteria clear on what behaviors are going to get rewarded, what results are going to get rewarded, what behaviors are not going to get rewarded, helps people understand all of those things for the outcome. You do want to make it clear how their efforts impact the customer, whether it's an internal customer or external customer, and you do want to make sure that there is accountability. One thing that's very disengaging for high performers is to see that the low performers aren't being held accountable for their low performance. And that doesn't mean you have to fire people, but it does mean that the low performance should be addressed, that there could be performance coaching or whatever appropriate steps are to rise the lower performers up so that the workload is more evenly distributed. And then the last is relationships. And relationships kind of come into three buckets. There's the bucket of the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis, which would be staff and peers and your boss. And you want to see what kind of environment are you working in. We as humans don't do well, don't survive long by ourselves. We survive longer if we're in a tribe, right? A tribe where people are going to support us and help us through times where we're hurt or injured or just not able to care for ourselves. So what kind of environment do you have? Do you have processes that help catch human errors? Or do you have an environment where people can ask for help and advice and they back each other up and support each other and learn from each other, where all the interactions are respectful and trusting? Or do you have an environment that's like competitive, where people are stepping on each other and finger pointing, and there's a lot of CYA activities going on? That second environment is not going to promote engagement. So you really want to look at how the day-to-day relationships are set up. And then you want to look at people's relationships with the companies. So one sort of extreme example is if you have someone who's a vegan and they're working for a meat packing company, your corporate visions and values are not aligned, that person's not going to be engaged. You also want to make sure your contributions feel recognized and appreciated by the company and the owner. And then the last relationship is with the customers. Do you have sort of a line of sight of how you're impacting the customers? Right, whether it's an internal or external customer. So those are the 5 key engagement drivers of VIGOR: the vision, independence, growth, outcome, and relationships. By the way, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat at the end. We'll stop and go over any questions that you have. I'm not good at looking at the chat and going through the slides, so I'm not monitoring it as we go through this. So we'll go on to leadership and trust. And here's a quote from Steve Jobs that I really like. It says, "It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do." And I like this quote because it kind of shows the change in leadership that has occurred over the last few decades. Back when in the 70s or 80s of last century, leadership was much more top-down, much more authoritative. There wasn't a lot of outreach to the lower levels of the company to get feedback and input. And you've seen a real shift in that. And so right now, leadership is a really interesting topic because so many people have so many different opinions of what good leadership is. And it's changing with more women in management and leadership roles, with the millennials coming into the workforce, and now even Generation Z behind them. What makes a good leader is really changing, but it's changing to be along those lines of really listening to everybody. So with that, I want to go into these slides about what leadership versus management looks like, especially in how you're communicating with people. So I believe everybody's a manager and everybody's a leader, even if you're only managing and leading yourself, right? But managers' focus is on getting something done. They're focused on schedules, an action plan, and measuring the results. So they spend most of their time having conversations where they're informing people, they're coordinating with people, or they're assessing results. Leaders, on the other hand, are working more with mindset, right? And people's mindsets, their experiences, and their beliefs are going to dramatically impact what actions they take and what results they get. And so leaders who want to focus on motivating people and figuring out how to get the most out of them have to work up there in the mindset, experience, and belief realm. And so their conversations are different. Their conversations are going to be to understand people, to engage people, kind of co-create with those people, exchange ideas, and to influence them. So I don't know if any of you have ever watched, there's a show called Undercover Boss, where a CIO of sort of a larger company goes into the skies and goes and works at a non-management position in their company out in the field. And if you think about it, the companies of that size have management reports. So the CEO is getting management reports with performance metrics, performance measures, and looks like they have a ton of information about their company. But it's really not enough, right? These CEOs are driven to go out there and actually be with their employees and see what is their employees' day-to-day life like. What is it that their employees are suffering with? What is it that their employees, what are their challenges? And every single one of these CEOs that go out there is surprised by what they find. They're surprised by decisions that they've made that are actually causing their employees problems, that with unintended consequences that they never thought of. They're surprised by, just sort of what it takes to get some of the jobs done. And they always come back and they always make changes based on this newfound information of actually going out and understanding what their employees' experiences are and what their employees are thinking about their company. So let's look at those three different types of leadership conversations: the understanding, the engaging, and the influencing. So the first one is understanding. And Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, one of the habits is to seek first to understand and then be understood, right? So it's key to high performance. It's key to succeeding. How do you know what these people's experiences and beliefs are? So there's a couple different ways. One is to sort of like the undercover boss, be in their environment. A lot of times people call that management by walking around. If you have remote people, then you're going to have to do management by walking around by Zoom or video or phone call or something. But it's important to go to your employees and be in their environment and drop in unannounced and see how they're doing. Ask them questions about, what are you working on? How are things going? And kind of take note of what's their emotional state. Are you walking in and they're tired? Are you walking in and they're frustrated? Or they're happy? What kind of state are you finding your employees in? And chit-chatting with them. It's something I've done all of my career, because one of my first directors did it, and it made me realize how much he knew about all of us and how much he knew about how much all of us was working on, much more so than our boss, who was in the office all the time. So management by walking around is key to getting into your staff's experiences and really understanding what it is that they're dealing with. And the other way is to ask questions and be curious, right? Ask them what they think. Ask them why they think people did things or why something happened. And the key to understanding people is to really get to that why. So, everybody is so different and everybody has such different experiences that one thing can happen and somebody can think it's positive and somebody else can think that it's negative, right? So take Star Wars, for example. It's one of the most popular movies of all time, but you're still going to get a good number of people who said they don't like the movie at all. But the interesting part is to ask them why. So if you ask them why, you might get one person that says, it's all fantasy and I don't have time. I'm too practical. I don't have time to watch that much fantasy. Or you could have someone else that says it's too violent. I don't like to see people's arms cut off. It's too violent for me. Or you could get someone else that says, I don't believe in the force. It goes against my religion. Now, all of those comments tell you something about the movie, but all of those comments also tell you something about the person who's making the comment and about what's important to them and what their perspective is. But that's the type of thing that you want to listen for. That's how you're going to get a better understanding of the person and what's important to them. So the next type of conversation is about engaging people. And Deming, who was a management consultant who went to Japan after World War II and really helped them get to be the #1 in quality manufacturers, has a quote that says, people support what they create, right? And so you want to look at, how can I co-create solutions with people? You want to co-create it with your team, with your peers, with your boss, and even with your customer. And the reason is, when you co-create stuff with people, they buy in, they support it. It helps them feel ownership and empowerment. And when you start asking people what their opinion is and what do they think of this, it puts them in actually a more creative mindset if you do it on a repetitive basis, and it helps them be more innovative and more creative. The one caution on this, though, is that this can devolve quickly into design by committee if you're not careful. And that's not the point here. The point here is still to have one person that makes the final decision and one person is still accountable. But you're making a better, more informed decision because you've gotten input from other people and who have potentially given you perspectives or thoughts that you hadn't taken into consideration. And now you can make a better, more informed decision that's maybe tweaking your original plan to be more effective. So the last type of conversation is influencing people. Here's a quote by Brendan Burchard, and if you guys don't know Brendan Burchard, he's one of the top high performance coaches and trainers that's out there. And the quote is, "People are influenced most by those they trust, admire, and believe care for them." And if you take a moment and think about that, I'm pretty sure you'll think that that's a true statement. And if you think it's a true statement, then the beauty of it is that it gives you a list of what you need to do to be considered to be influential, right? You need to build trust, you need to build respect or admiration, and you need to care for people. And so some of those conversations we were just talking about will help you do that. If you're understanding people and you're engaging people, it's going to build that trust. It's going to build that respect. People are going to think that you actually care about them because you're asking for when you ask somebody for their opinion and their input, it is a sign of respect. It's a sign of trust. It's a sign that you care about them and their opinion. So once you've sort of built that foundation of the relationship where you have some rapport with the person, Brendan, once again, has a book called High Performance Habits, and he has 6 high performance habits in the book. And one of them is influence. And on his chapter in influence, he breaks down 3 steps that you can use to influence somebody. And if you think about someone who's been influential to you in your life, and you think about how they influenced you, it's very likely that they use something along these 3 steps to influence you. So the 3 steps are: 1, you give someone a new way to think about something. And then 2, you challenge them to grow. You explain to them how if taking that new way of looking at it will actually help them grow in either character, contribution, or connection. And then the 3rd step, which is the most important in my opinion, is to role model the behavior. Right? Because if you don't role model the behavior, then you're just sort of being manipulative in the first 2 steps. But if you role model the behavior and people actually think that if you were in their situation, this is exactly what you would do, then you're advising them, then you're mentoring them, then you're coaching them. And it has a whole different feel to it than you're just trying to manipulate them into doing something that neither of you would really want to do. So I had a boss that did this to me. He wanted me to take a position where I'd have to work with someone who I found really difficult and didn't really want to interact with. And he called me into his office, and I went in determined that I was not going to take this position. And he pointed out that the person I thought was difficult, he wasn't the only one that had these personality traits, that there were multiple people in the office that had the same trait. And that if I had learned to master that trait and mastered how to work with that trait, then I would be able to work with all of these people much easier. So he gave me a new way to think about it. He challenged me to step up and figure out how to take my game to the next level. And he was really good at people interactions. I watched him handle some very difficult situations with very difficult people in just amazing ways. And so I knew it was genuine, and that that he got as good as he was by taking the advice that he was giving me to take. And so I actually signed up to do it, to work with this person. And I walked out of his office thinking, like, how did he convince me to do that? So when I read this chapter in Brendan's book, and I read these 3 steps, that was the first thing I thought of. I'm like, this is how he convinced me to do that. And so it's nice to have that in sort of your toolbox. If you're trying to figure out how you can influence someone, pull up these 3 steps and see how they would apply. But again, it's important that you have some rapport with them first, and that they actually trust and like you and think that you care about them. And whenever I go over these 3 types of conversations that leaders have, the understanding, the engaging, and the influence, typically someone will say, well, what happens when I just can't get my people to open up to me? Or, they'll tell me something that I just want to hear. They're not really telling me the truth, or they're not telling me like the difficult things. And in that case, you've got to really look at trust and have you set up a trusting environment. And some people are a little bit taken back by that because they think that they're honest and why wouldn't somebody trust them? But trust is really a little bit more complicated than that. So here's another Stephen Covey quote that says, trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. And it really is. So if people aren't communicating, you really do need to look and to see if there's an issue with trust. But I believe there's what I call the 4 C's of trust. So it's not just character about whether or not you're honest, but it's also competency, right? So I'm not going to come, if I'm trying to get a real issue addressed, but I feel like either you don't have the authority to handle the issue, or you don't have the skills to handle the issue, or you're just not going to confront the issue, then I'm probably not going to come talk to you about it. One of the other C's is consistency. If I come and talk to you about an issue that needs to be addressed, are you going to consistently be respectful? Are you going to consistently sort of follow the rules of, what gets rewarded, what doesn't? Consistency helps. Consistency of knowing what to expect really helps people feel safe. If somebody makes a mistake and there's just all of a sudden this huge reaction to it, people don't feel safe. So it's very important that people feel that there's a consistency and that they know what to expect. And then the last C is caring. Does a person feel that you care about them, or do they feel like you only care about yourself or the company, right? They need to feel that you're looking for like a win-win situation, and it's not that you care about them until they start interfering with your goals, and then all bets are off, because then they're only going to trust you to a certain point. Now, the good thing is if you do have problems in any of these areas with trust, we just went over good ways of building trust, right? The conversations to understand people, the conversations to engage people, those will all help build up that environment of trust. So let's look at leadership and pull it all together. So what I'm recommending here is to be a little more intentional in the conversations that you're having, and look for ways to add these sort of leadership conversations into the conversations that you're already having. So for understanding, right, and it's really understanding people's perspective and understanding people's thoughts. And this, by the way, is where diversity comes in. There's a big push right now to have diversity and inclusion. It's really that diversity of thought, diversity of perspective that people are looking for, because it helps flush out a picture and helps you make better, more informed decisions. So start practicing, and all of these conversations, the more casual you can have them, the more open people tend to be. So you want to be kind of authentic, you want to be casual, informal, and just ask people, how do you think that went? What do you think about this? You want to engage people. One of the best ways to kind of engage people and co-create or exchange ideas is to go first and to ask somebody, hey, can I run something by you? My first job out of school, I was a software developer, and one of my fellow developers used to always come in to my office and go to the whiteboard and say, hey, can I run something by you? And he'd run one of his software designs by me. And I would throw out different scenarios or permutations or variables that maybe he hadn't thought of to help him flesh out his design. And then I would totally leverage aspects of his design, because some of his designs were really clever. And so I would implement them in my code. So he would come in for just 15 minutes and run some stuff by me, and I would throw some stuff out at him. And out of that 15 minutes, his code got better, my code got better, our code was more aligned, the customer end product was better, If he was out sick or on vacation, I could go in and pick up his code and make changes. So it was this huge win. And when the group started falling apart and everybody left, he and I were the last two to leave because we were learning so much from each other. So that kind of back and forth between employees where it's kind of on the job training can really, really add to retention rates. And then the last part is influence, right? And influence in giving someone a new way to think about something, that's where you're really establishing thought leadership. So you want to ask questions like, well, what if we thought about it this way? Or I like to think about it this way. Or what happened if we would try this? Different ways for people to sort of start thinking about things in a new way. Now, I want to talk about how do you take some of these thoughts and insights and change them into actions. So I have 3 different challenges for you to see if you can do things over the next week that'll actually help in any of these areas. So the first one is for engagement. My challenge to you is to score yourself on how well you're managing the different VIGOR engagement drivers, and then pick one of them where you see the most room for improvement and to find something to do this week to improve it. And if you're having problems with this, if you email me at the email address at the bottom, Gretchen@dynamicbc.com, I will send you a complimentary VIGOR self-assessment that I have. It's a document. I'll just send it to you as an attachment, and you can take it offline. Nobody but you sees your results. And then for leadership, my challenge to you is to look at your calendars for the next week and look at your different meetings and conversations that you have scheduled and be a little more intentional about each one of them and see, is there a way that you can add understanding, engaging, and influencing conversations into them? So if you have a meeting where you're going to inform people of something, is there a way that you can ask some questions first to get a better understanding of people before you give them the information? So maybe you could tailor that information so that they can digest it a little easier. Or if you're coordinating with somebody, is there a way that you can engage them into the coordination, into the creation to get them more involved? Or if you're assessing results and going over something with somebody, is there a way that you can influence them and give them a new way to think about things to get better results going forward? And then the last area to challenge yourself on is trust. Some of you may not have an issue in this area, which is good. But if you, in going through it, thought there might be an area that you could improve, what is one thing that you could do to improve that area? And remember, when you're trying to build trust, it's like trying to build respect. You have to go first. And sometimes it won't work on the first try, right? If you have a bad relationship with someone and all of a sudden you change your behavior and start acting differently to them, a lot of times they're going to be a little suspect, and you may take a few tries before you can like break down a resistance and have them realize that you really are trying to build a better relationship with them. So we'll go over the key takeaways and then we'll take some questions. So engagement is really driven by 5 key engagement drivers. VIGOR, which stands for vision, independence, growth, outcomes, and relationships. It's also dependent on a foundation of leadership and trust. And ways to get sort of better leadership is to have better understanding, engagement, and influence with people. And again, anyone can be a leader, even individual contributors, right? And then for trust, the 4 C's of trust: character, competency, consistency, and caring. And so at this point, I'll open it up for any questions and send it back to Neil, I guess, actually.
Yeah, that's perfect, Gretchen. Thank you. And it's so interesting trying to moderate this or facilitate the webinar when I'm equally fascinated by the topic. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to pay attention that people are joining in or something. So thank you very much for the call. I am gonna. I was muting. I'm unmuting everybody. Excuse me. I'm muting everybody. but you now have the power to unmute yourself. A minute ago, you didn't have the power. So I did have there are some questions out there, so I wanted to get there. But I am curious on, some of this advice you give. I'm curious personally, does it apply? How does it apply into organizations that have less of an employee group of stakeholders you're trying to get buy-in to maybe, peer organization type buy-in? Does that make sense what I'm talking about? Like where you're...
Yeah, that's kind of my point. Like everybody can be a leader, right? For salespeople, co-create with your customer, right? If you're going to have to write a proposal, don't just get the requirements and walk away, but like sit down with them. Now that you understand their requirements, let's look at what possible solutions might be and have a conversation with them and see what's on their plate. What resources do they have? How fast do they want to go? All that kind of stuff. And then when you take that information and then write up the proposal, they're much more likely to say yes to that proposal because they have some skin in the game. It's partly their creation, right? So some of these conversations, you don't have to have a team. You don't have to be in charge of a company, even like a vision statement, right? It doesn't have to be the company vision statement. It can be your team's vision statement. It could be your own personal vision statement. So yes, it's all applicable for teams, but it's all human interaction. So it's, if you influencing skills, you can use with your kids. You can use with family members, you can use with friends. We're all humans and all want to be heard, all want to be, have our, they say the only things that people give for free is like advice and their opinion, right? So everybody wants to be heard. So most of this works inside our work and in personal lives.
No, that's good advice. I appreciate it. I know that, is it Tiana has a question, and then right behind, if anybody else has questions, definitely come off mute on your own. But I don't know if you're on mute at the moment. And I can unmute.
Tiana?
I was curious.
Tiana,
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed the webinar. I have a question. Our company is kind of going through an org restructure, and we're trying to improve employee satisfaction. So it's a smaller company. There's a lot of processes and things that we've been trying to put in place kind of in separate silos. And so we're actually trying to figure out how to standardize that process and improve employee satisfaction. But I want to know, what's the strategic way of doing that or going about doing that without going down a rabbit hole? Because sometimes we can talk high level or talk in circles and end up trying to recreate wheels or processes that are already in place. So I guess my question is, how do you get buy-in and how do you honestly combat employee engagement, making sure that everyone is in line with the company's vision without recreating the wheel, with taking some of the things that have already been worked in separate silos, but get buy-in to pull it all together, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you're saying there's been a lot of work done as far as different processes and stuff, but that they're siloed and it doesn't necessarily come together at the top. Am I understanding you correctly?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. So you definitely don't want to reinvent the wheel over and over again, right? That's not moving forward. So in that case, it almost sounds like the leadership maybe isn't all in sync. Is that true?
So it's really just trying to figure out where do we go, because we're a company that's grown pretty fast. And so now we are having to look at creating more standardized processes. So it's really a beginning phase of evolving from, your first 5 years into year 5 to 10 or 10 to 15, with kind of growing and capitalizing on what we've been doing and standardizing it.
So how many people are you right now?
We're about 66 employees.
66. Okay. Yeah. So when I do process work, I define process and procedures as two different things, right? So I define process as multiple entities that are interacting together, whether they're people or systems. And then I define procedures as sort of the steps you take to get something done. So it sounds like perhaps you guys have a lot of procedures, but you haven't really done the process where you have the different groups that are in these different silos and figured out how are they interacting with each other. Would that be accurate?
Exactly right.
Okay, so then that would be my recommendation, is to kind of take a step up and figure out, okay, here are my main groups, and this is how I want my main groups to interact, right? So, and you could do it like by a certain process. So if you had, you know, onboarding a new customer, let's say, and you had, there was something the finance group had to do, and there was something that the project management group had to do, and there was something that the delivery teams have to do. You know, and then the sales team, draw up a picture with all of those people and draw arrows between them, right? So, you know, what does the salesperson, you know, hands the signed, you know, proposal off to finance, and then they do something, and then they send it to maybe 2 people at the same time, and just sort of map it out there. And that will help you figure out some of those roles and handoffs that may not be clear. Because one of the things that happens when you're growing that, you know, fast, and you're going through these things, is sometimes one person does 2 jobs, and then all of a sudden it's too much, and now 2 people do those 2 jobs. And before, the one person didn't have to coordinate with themselves, and now 2 people have to coordinate that, and they have to kind of figure all that out. And sometimes that can be difficult. Another thing that happens on the process side is once you start getting multiple people doing the same job, if those people don't have the same skill set but are really like varying, then you're going to get varying results out unless you've been prescriptive about what you want that customer experience to be. So I have a whole nother presentation I do called Strategic Process Design, where I go over sort of trade-offs that are inherent in a process, like where do you want to be prescriptive, and where do you want guidelines, where do you want to have speed and trust, and where do you want to stop and check. And it talks about how most processes are either dictated from the top down, in which case the employee's needs are often missed, or they're organically grown from the bottom up, in which case the employees and the customers' needs are met, but a lot of times the business needs aren't met, and everything's inconsistent, and information isn't really managed well, and nobody really knows where to go for things. But strategic process design looks at all 3, the customer, the business, and the employee, and try to meet all of their needs. But you start with what's your customer experience, and you get really clear at your customer touch points what you want that customer experience to be, and then you build up the processes to support that. But you could think about the business and what the business needs as far as information, roles and responsibilities, structure, communications, and then you look at how do you set your employees up for success based on some of these employee engagement things that we just went over. I mean, that was really high level, but I hope that helps.
No, it did help. Thank you. I appreciate that. I actually jotted down a couple of notes. And how do I find out about this webinar, the Strategic Process Design? When do you do that, or where can I get information to find out about that webinar?
If you send me an email at gretchen@dynamicbc.com, I will get you some information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Any other questions out there? I know there was a lot of great information shared, and Gretchen, I like the detailed answer you're able to provide them. That was good information for a growing company. And I've been in the exact same spot as them. It's like you grow fast, and you got a lot of great people, but maybe our core processes, procedures, et cetera, aren't in place. Everybody else, you have the ability to unmute yourself if you have questions. I am curious, a lot of you took the time and invested to come to the webinar, right, to come in. I'm curious on if you're able to share with Gretchen maybe one thing you're taking away as, hey, this was really insightful. An example for me when I walk away from this is how much I'm more management and I'm a bad manager, but I really want to be a leader because I'm really trying to drive the direction of government contracting in general, right? I'm really trying to push a lot more success to small businesses. And so that's the leadership side. That's my takeaway, is the understanding really that difference between the two.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, any other questions? Happy to answer some.
And remember, if you got questions, you got to unmute yourself.
Any questions about the 5 key drivers, the vision, independence, growth, outcome, relationships? Because when I did the research on that, it was actually really interesting to go to some of the high performance coaches that really coach individuals on their high performance. And a lot of them use different words and stuff, but they were all saying the exact same thing, which is people need to feel, you know, heard. They need to have significance. They need to be challenged. They want to grow. They want to have that connection with people. You know, they want that higher purpose. But none of that, they all sort of deal with people on just an individual basis. And so it was interesting kind of taking all of them, and I have a whole spreadsheet where I take the different people and what they do, and I map it all together to come up with the VIGOR. So any questions on that, I'd love to take, or if you have any comments on whether or not you thought it was useful or not. Appreciate it.
One thing I would definitely encourage everybody, and this is Neil, just encourage everybody, you can see on the slide right now, we're all looking at, actually some of you are on the phone, so you might not be able to see it, but go visit Gretchen's website, www.dynamicbc.com, and you'll be able to see a lot of what she offers and be able to reach her.
Hey, this is Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Mark.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Finally got it. I had a question. We're a small company, about 20 people, and working for longevity, and I was really perked my ears on the outcome of your VIGOR, and you're talking about accountability for low performers, and the lack of proper accountability can negatively affect top performers.
Right.
And that's something I've been trying to figure out on my end. How do you keep people accountable when you're not punishing or firing, and they know that that's really not an option? That's a struggle for me.
It comes down to coaching, really, right? So one, you have to address it. And one way to address, and you always want to address the behavior, not the person, right? So you want to make it, for the people to absorb the feedback, you don't want it necessarily to be feedback about them personally. You want it to be about their behavior, which is a little bit separate from them, because all kinds of studies show that that's how people can hear it. And then if it's more about like, well, you did this, people shut down. So what you want to do is, if something happens, you want to sort of frame the situation and say, you know, blah, blah, blah happened. Here was the outcome, and, you know, that wasn't good for these reasons. And then say, give them an example of what could have been done differently, and say, you know, so here's the situation, you know, if these things had been done differently, then, you know, perhaps we could have gotten to a better outcome, right? But you don't want to, you want to make it as little about them as a person and more about their behavior and the results that you got from it. And then work with them, right? And this is where you want to have these conversations where you're understanding them. You know, why was the behavior the way it was? I mean, you could find out that, you know, they have some personal stuff going on and they're just can't get their head together because they're so worried about something that's going on in their home life that you just had no idea about. Or you could find out that they just were looking at something the wrong way, right? Like Chick-fil-A is a great example of being able to change the way their employees think. Chick-fil-A is known for their customer service, And one of the things that they do when they train new people is they show them a video. And the video has all of these customers that are just being horrible, right? There's a lady that's like screaming at them. There's a kid that's like making a mess with the soda and all these different things. And so they show you this video of customer after customer after customer just like exhibiting just horrible behavior. And then they rewind it and they show it again, but with subtitles. And so the lady that's just screaming at them, it now says like she just found out her husband's dying of cancer, right? And so it gives you like a backstory to everybody that makes their horrible behavior now acceptable. So you don't know what these people's backstory is. You don't know what's going on with them, that they're not getting to the performance level. Now, of course, this is situational, right? So if we're talking about somebody new and it's a first time that something's happened, then you really don't know what's going on and you really want to do a deep dive. You know, if this is like repeated behavior, time after time, different things have been tried and the person's just not working out, well, then that's a path to some disciplinary action, right? But if it's people, you know, if you want people to be creative, you want people to be innovative, they have to take risks. They have to, you know, we're human, we make mistakes. You want your processes to try to shore up areas that are really manual intensive and error prone to try to catch those mistakes before the customer sees them. But, you know, you really want to understand people and you know, I used to work for a guy who was always like, who used to always, if someone messed up, he would say, "What were you thinking?" And then he went to some executive coaching and he would say, "So tell me what your thought process was when you made that decision." Right? It was sort of the same thing, but it was in a way where, okay, now I understand the thought process, right? Because if you're going to really lead, you have to take ownership of not only yourself, but you have to take ownership of your team. And if your team isn't doing what you want them to do, you as a leader need to do something different, right? And so saying, you know, what was your thought process when you made that decision is a great question, because they could be making assumptions about things that just, it's information they just didn't know or didn't have. And so they made a bad assumption. And then you realize, oh, the real root problem here is that they're not getting the information they need, right? And so I would, there's definitely performance coaching, mentoring steps to be had before there's like really harsh things that happen to non-performers. Did that help?
Tremendously, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Gretchen, I was going to say, you gotta love that response. It just wasn't helpful. It was tremendously helpful.
Yes, I appreciate that. I'm glad
Right.
you found some value in it.
Oh, it's funny too. Like for me, and this is Neil again, just being on the call, listening to that question, I can so like relate to it and the things, and I take it strictly, you know, I would have answered it strictly from an accountability standpoint. I like how you're, you know, what were you thinking to? What was your thinking process or something?
Yeah.
Different, certainly a different approach, and great.
Yeah.
Okay, so anybody else? I mean, you definitely reach back out. I'm going to send an email out with Gretchen's information, et cetera, to anybody registered. But, you know, we still have her for a few minutes if anybody has questions.
Yeah, I love the questions so far. You guys have had great questions.
I have a question, by the way. How do you come off a mute on your phone? Is it like *6 or something? Or
I think it was *6, but you have to be patient.
Okay, Gretchen, it seems like we don't have any more questions at the moment, which is
okay. Well, if anybody comes up with something, you know, after we get off the call, feel free to reach out to me at Gretchen@dynamicbc.com. I'd be happy to answer anything that, you know, you think of after we get off.
Perfect. Hey, everybody, if you're not active on GovCon Chamber, go to GovCon Chamber. You'll see more of these type of events. Somebody gave me an idea for trying to bring Gretchen back, not just for this presentation again next year, but also the other one, Gretchen, you mentioned, it'd be great
for process, yeah.
Yeah, it'd
be happy to do that
as well.
Okay.
Providing really good information. Keep in mind, for those of you who are on the call, there's something on it that keeps people to the end of a webinar. So definitely follow up with Gretchen. She's available. I'm personally going to be following up with her, talking to her about the GovCon Chamber's vision and mission in the direction of improving our ability to articulate to all of our stakeholders the direction we're trying to go. So I think you'll really enjoy reaching out to her.
Yeah, and if you guys are struggling with your vision statement, there's a great TED Talk by Simon Sinek. It's called, Simon Sinek wrote a book called Starting with Why, but that's not the name of his TED Talk. It's something about how leaders influence people or something like that. But look, Simon Sinek is the name. If you look him up, it's one of the top TED Talks. And it's 15 minutes long or something, but it's really, really good about starting with the why. I mean, it's a really good TED Talk. I would recommend it if you're struggling with your vision.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know if you're seeing the chatting, but Kim Edwards wrote, Gretchen did such a great job. I learned a lot. And thank you, Neil, for putting it
thank
together.
you.
Hey, by the way, let me just wrap up with this, let everybody go. But if you have other topics that you'd love to see the GovCon Chamber we'd love to do it. We're going to be working closely with Gretchen in the future, so you'll see her come back in any way I can convince her to come back.
Absolutely.
And then if there's other things you'd like to learn more about or see us push on, I said this at the beginning, Gretchen and her company, Dynamic Business Capabilities, and the GovCon Chamber are both interested in improving small business success rates. And so anything we can do to help you, we want to do that.
Absolutely.
I just say thank you again, Gretchen. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Hope everybody has a great day.
All right. Thank you.
This meeting.